Welcome to People Powered Strategy, the podcast where we sit down with the minds shaping the future of work. Every week, we bring you candid conversations with chief people officers and HR leaders who are driving business outcomes by putting people first. In each episode, we dive into the real-world strategies behind employee retention, talent development, and organizational growth, getting into the nuts and bolts of building HR systems that don't just support the business, but propel it forward.
Hi, Connie. Thanks so much for joining us today on People Powered Strategy.
Hi, Anthony. Good to be here with you.
It's great to have you. Before we get started, I'm sure audience just love to hear a little bit more about you, your kind of background. What led you to your current position?
Yeah, I would say I have a pretty dimensional background. I've been in biotech for 20 years. My current job in Altos Labs for 4 years, just celebrated my 4th anniversary. And prior to that, I worked in a couple of other Fortune 500 companies outside of the biotech industry. And, my path has been about I've been a very curious person in my career. And I've always wanted to say, well, how much more can I contribute in ways, and the themes have been around opportunity to innovate, opportunity to make something even more impactful. That's been my keen interest throughout my career. And learning all the way. I would call myself a lifelong learner. And this opportunity at Altos Labs came up to lead the people function 4 years ago. And I jumped at it. I had a great job at Genentech, but I jumped at it because this was a whole new area that I knew was going to grow so exponentially and potentially have a profound impact, in science, medicine, and quite honestly, even the world, on aging, on health span, because our company is setting out to reverse disease and disability. I mean, what a amazing opportunity. So I jumped at it, and I think it just sort of checked all my boxes with being innovative and also just contributing to this brand new frontier.
Yeah, I totally understand it. Yeah, and certainly that does sound very impactful. Well, so what specifically about the people function do you think sort of made you want to be part of that?
Well, it was the opportunity from the ground up to help build a company. And that's a once in a lifetime opportunity in which, you always think of, the phrase risk and reward. And some, folks said, oh my gosh, like you're leaving, a great job going into this. I was like, I have a chance to build a company, to just have, and I kind of thrive. Of course, I like anyone else, I like things to be, as unchaotic as possible. But I thrive in the opportunity to take something and make something to maximize something. So I thought it was a great opportunity to, number one, get involved in all areas of the people function, leadership development, change management, organizational design, hiring, and of course, there's always the practical elements that are really important to keep a company going. But it just, help bringing people along to how, building culture, which is always important, an ongoing process. So it definitely checked all the boxes for me and still does.
Yeah, I love how, you really put your finger on, I think, how the people function. I think maybe in the past, especially with like HR leadership and everything, people have thought of it as being like very much like a kind of almost like something that's separate from organizational growth a little bit, like a kind of bureaucratic thing. And I think what you put your finger on really is that like it isn't, it's to do with actually building the culture, which is what keeps the company turning. Who you populate company with, the people that you have, the working culture that you have is your driver. And as much as anything else is, I think, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that brings up a few things. I agree. I think human resources, and particular in my people function, my mandate that I put on myself, and also, like, for example, my team's goal this year is transformational mindset. It's not do this, and these are important and interesting goals, but it's like, how can we continue to, impress upon ourselves our own mindset, our own activities that can help transform the organization and run alongside of our colleagues to make that happen. I think that the body of human resources is actually endlessly fascinating. It's not the, everything. The fundamentals are always important. The hiring process, anything that, even the mechanics of it, super important for that to be always done well. But, you know, there's also within that, how are teams connecting and how are we helping with that? How are people developing or not? And how can we, to help that and work alongside, what observations, what data do we have in the organization and what does that tell us, about retention? And if human resources isn't thinking of itself as a highly innovative function, then it's missing the mark. Because even in any type of a data set, you can kind of make inference, and deduction as to what could happen next. And we have the unique opportunity to look around the corner and protect our business, to build our business, to really, attract the brightest minds, keep the brightest minds. So I think it's an endless opportunity for innovation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, one of the other things that's important to highlight as well is that people's tenures at companies are kind of shrinking, actually. Like, people don't stay in jobs as long anymore. And it's kind of, I think that, what you do, your function, creating that culture where you have people who want to stick around for a long period of time. Obviously, people want to move on, and that's a thing. But you also do want to have people who are there long enough and want to stick around, that you can actually build like a consistent way of working, right? And a consistent culture. And what you're talking about there, in terms of like progression and development of people,
Yes.
that's like a massive tenet of retention, isn't it? People don't stick around unless they can see, why should I? Well, how am I going to develop? What am I going to learn here? Yeah, no one wants to feel stagnant today. And that's not just monetary. That's just not just about pay promotions, money, but of course that's part of it. But also like you were talking about how you wanted to, broaden your horizons and do things that were impactful.
Yeah.
I think that's a key part of it as well. People just want to be evolving, don't they?
Yeah. And you bring up something that's so important, and it's an interesting philosophical, I wouldn't say debate, but something I ponder quite frequently and have some discussions around. Retention is very important. So you want to have kind of the right, do I have a mathematical formula at my fingertips? Perhaps not. But it is something, you think about, what is the ideal porosity in an organization? You do want some talent flow in and sometimes out, sometimes an organization has everything somebody needs and that person is progressing very well and they're continuing to evolve. So it's on all of us, myself included, as employees, to evolve, to again say, okay, this is what's needed next. How am I preparing for that? And how can I contribute at this next level? Because my assumption always is that the current year is going to look different next year, the following year. So it's a matter of doing really well and thriving for all of us in our jobs and prepare while preparing. And again, that looking around the corner as, what does my company need next? And how can I flex? Who do I, work with? Who do I, connect with? What do I need to learn practically? What immersion do I need to have in new technologies and new approaches and staying fresh? And that's an expectation and a hope that I have for employees in any industry, is always staying fresh, focusing on your job at hand and excelling on that, and also staying fresh as to what is coming up in the future and always thinking of adding value. But I also think that sometimes, and this is where I have a bit of elasticity, sometimes you have really great employees and they have different interests, and that's okay when that happens. I would never want retention for retention's sake. I would want, because you want to have the opportunity as well to have, at times different perspectives, but we also want to make sure that, people are thriving and they feel really that they're invested in the organization, that they're contributing positively to our culture, because culture's everyone's responsibility. So those things are important as well.
Yeah, like absolutely. I agree completely. And it definitely with keeping up to date, I think it's more important than ever, especially I mean, everyone's talking about AI, aren't they? But it's true. I mean, it's absolutely true, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think you can't wait around. I think for it to come to you. I think it's important to stay ahead of the curve, especially. I know I've spoken to a lot of people in your role recently who are saying that, like, that they're actually quite excited about what new emerging technologies are going to do for their role, and they're eager to kind of train their teams up with how it can save them time in particular, how it can allow them to be more strategic. I didn't plan to ask you about this, Apsu, but I was wondering maybe we could just slip in a bit of an AI question here. What do you think? What's your attitude
I
toward it?
Yeah, I have a I have a positive attitude, and I gate that with knowing that, like anything else, there are cautions. A very positive attitude. In fact, early in the year, I started to, and last year, kind of speaking of immersion, really get some not only subject matter knowledge, but I enrolled in both MIT and Brown, and great courses and programs to make sure that I had a good line of sight as to what the technologies are, how to build an AI roadmap, for my organization, how to help others do so. I mentor quite a few people in human resources and help, them think about, new technologies, new applications. But I think, one particular area in AI that I remain very interested in is the ethics on it. And California, which is the state that I reside in and work in primarily, has some, you know, uh, laws around, coming up and kind of, also being discussed on the horizon. And then, it's an interesting juxtaposition with what seems to be positions in, the broader government as well as to like kind of let it go and see where it goes. So it's very interesting to see what are the implications. And just thinking about AI, something I stay focused on, Anthony, is making sure there's the right amount of transparency. That's I feel like my obligation as a people leader. Also, are people using it in a way that does truly free them for other things, but it's a good tool for them to do their jobs effectively, but it doesn't replace something that they should be doing. Like, for example, simple example is synthesizing information, you know, for a snapshot, great use of AI, you know, sorting through things, but always something I have a position about is making sure that unfair bias is never introduced. And we have to stay vigilant about those things. So I'm both excited as well as watchful, but I'm running alongside of it with the eagerness for sure.
I hate the danger that I see sometimes is that like certain skills that we have don't atrophy because of over reliance on it.
Yes.
That's is the thing that and I've actually seen it happen. I'll be honest with myself at times. Like I was relying on it a lot at one time for just helping me do like draft out emails and stuff. And at first I was like, oh wow, this is so good. And then there was one time where I couldn't use it for at 4 point, and I was sort of like, oh, I'll just type out an email.
Right.
And I suddenly had like a mental block where I was suddenly kind of like, wait, how do I phrase this? How do I? And I was like, and it suddenly occurred to me, I was like, this is really bad. Like, this is a skill that you should, you don't want to lose like that skill. And I do think we don't, because we know with like physical exercise, don't we, that you kind of have to keep your body moving in order for it to still keep moving.
Yes.
But we don't think about that in terms of the mind. And it definitely is true. I think that things that we do in our work that maybe are more kind of mentally taxing have to be exercised. And that's
Totally.
kind of the fear I have. So I think
Yeah.
that the use of it then is to, I mean, a lot of people said this, but we want to use AI to augment what we already have, don't we? Rather
That's
than
right.
replace it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to be efficient in ways that help free us up for truly what's most important. And also, it's interesting. I had dinner with a group of friends maybe about a month ago, and a friend and all the rest of us chimed in. She's like, I'm reading this book. I know it's an interesting book, and I'm such a reader, and I'm having a hard time with the book because we have always, a lot of we're in a soundbite culture. Like, you have TikTok, you have Instagram, you have, you know, even in the area we're talking about AI, a lot of things can come to us. You can order something, it arrives on your doorstep like in a few hours the next day. So with that said, our minds are, you do have to be able to have the stamina as well for that deep thought and for that more intricate thought. I completely agree with you of, treating your brain as a muscle, that can atrophy at all. And also like everything else I said, always thinking about the implications. Like, is this the best way to engage AI? And, making sure that there's a clear and supportive position in the company to move ahead with technology and to be really eager for it, but also making sure, what could be the impact otherwise, and just being cognizant of that.
Yeah, definitely. And intentionality, I think, is always important, isn't it? And then, like, know why you're doing it and what the impact is going to be. I think it's always key, isn't it? I wanted to bring up something that you mentioned to us when we first started chatting, Kai, which was I thought was a really interesting phrase, which was practical empathy.
Yeah.
And it's this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess it's about that kind of balance of, empathy as a necessity, obviously, in terms of building good teams, but also in a way that kind of, I guess, still kind of keeps things moving in a company and actually is effective in kind of getting things done. I wonder if you could, I'm probably murdering this definition. So I wonder if you could unpack what you meant by that a little bit more and what that means for your role in particular, what it means for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think empathy is a word that we hear quite often in our professional and personal lives, definitely in our personal lives. It is something that, and it's genuine. So when it's use the phrase, I guess you could say I coined practical empathy. It's not like artificial. It's incredibly genuine, and it's the practice of really taking time in place. It's, to understand what could the other person be receiving, how they're receiving information. What is their point of view? What is how might they be perceiving something as a gain, as a threat? But what all of us really do best if we have a sense of what's expected, and also, what is our role? You always go back to, like, when there's something that is newly introduced, when it's an important relationship at work, like, what could the other person perceive, again, as a gain or a loss? How can you both work together, or this group or team work together to, where could there be missing information that people have that could jump to assumptions and therefore potential conflict. So being in a practical empathy space is a mindset of making sure that you're very aware and you care about the perspectives and details that matter the most to other people. And that's not a deliberative thing, it's not an overly orchestrated thing, it's not something that you need to carve out 2 hours of your day. It's just becomes, if you can put institute that in the fabric of how you work, and really thinking about what is this setup and how could somebody respond? How can somebody adapt to this? Where could there be obstacles? And you treat your team relationships and your colleague relationships as this partnership. That's going to be a recipe for success for two things: most important work being done and done well. So that's something that I keep as a very core mindset of mine is, and of course, yes, do I highly value, being a kind person? Absolutely. Absolutely. Do I value, being a really good colleague, being responsible, people being able to count on me? Hugely value that. And also really keeping that mindset of always, what is the impact of your words, of your facilitation, of your working relationship, of your team leadership on other people? And that's practical empathy is, and everybody, I would encourage everybody really think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think in terms of like a corporate environment as well, I mean, I think it probably can't hurt to be aware of what other people's job roles are. And I know that
Yes.
sounds really obvious, but we're not always aware of what other people, especially in larger organizations, I think, and especially in remote work, people get stuck in silos quite often. And I've been in companies before where people kind of like, I don't have a clue what he does. I know him, but I don't know what he does. I guess like in that case, it's like the practical application of what you're talking about there is for people to have to know what each other is doing. Even if they're not necessarily directly involved in each other's jobs, it's still going to come up at some point that they have to communicate about
Yes.
something. And if they have that context of understanding what the other person is doing, that's going to lead to that kind of thing that you're talking
Oh,
about, isn't
yeah.
it? I think that
Oh, very
empathy,
much.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think simply asking that, like I can count, a couple of times in the last couple of weeks that I've said, not confrontationally, but, hey, what do you think your role is in this? Or here's my role in this. Having those conversations as a habit, and it's not like, what is your role in this? Because, I have turf I want to protect. No, I don't, think like that. But it's, really kind of especially as you enter new things, an alignment of what people perceive their roles are. And it doesn't have to be stiff and, and formal, but, I've had a couple of those check-ins because then if somebody say, well, I say, oh, okay. And then, that reduces the opportunity for not only misunderstanding, I could say, "Oh, Anthony, oh, that's what you see your role is. Okay, great." And, sometimes you may disagree with that, and sometimes you may say, "Oh, gee, well, I thought that was my role as well. Let's talk through it." But wow, what an accelerant to things being done well and productively is just aligning on who's doing what. And you maybe it's come up in our prior conversations that we've had about how role clarity is one of the three things that I think, if done poorly, can really negatively impact an organization. When done well, can absolutely speed the right work along very quickly. And role clarity doesn't mean swim lane. It doesn't mean that you're just stuck or you're relegated to a very defined or confined space. Role clarity is just kind of like, hey, I think I'm leading this, or I think I'm a subject matter expert, or I think that I should be arbitrating this decision. That's, and then somebody may agree, disagree, or they may have questions, or, that's so important to reducing potential conflict and kind of gaining coalition.
Yeah, definitely. And especially if you get to a point where, maybe somebody hasn't done something that you expect them to do, but if you don't understand and you don't understand their role, you're going to be more confrontational with them than if you do.
Yeah.
Because if you understand the challenges that they're coming up against on a day-to-day basis, it's going to make you more empathetic, isn't it? More understanding, more open to that conversation about, okay, well, what can we do to make it so that it's more easy for you to do, to meet your expectations or whatever it is. I think you definitely don't want people to be caught in that kind of nebulous space as well, where like people kind of like I said, it's like, I don't really know what my job is anymore. I'm just kind of drinking for one things for another. Like, I know what you mean. There is a kind of balance there
Yeah.
between allowing people to be adventurous and venture outside of it, but then also be like, no, like I
Yeah.
understand 100%. I've definitely been in roles like
Sometimes,
that before.
a model that I think about that's made sense to a lot of people, I'll share it with you, is, when you have a potential like impasse or disagreement or even a conflict, treat it as if the assuming it's two people, right, or a group of people, that it's the thing that's in front of you that you're all trying to work on. And I don't mean, pussyfooting around or being or having this circuitous philosophical conversation. I'm talking about, having shared ownership, that it's never one person, nothing is ever one person's fault. It's not, and that's also something that's a mindset that I've had and carried through with me, that if there is something that goes off the rails, that isn't optimal, something that I'm frustrated by, I think, "What is my role?" And I always introduce that in the conversation, say, "Okay, I've shared, my point of view. Thank you for listening. Tell me what I could have done differently. There is always something there. Always. It could be a something small. If there's a disconnect, or even like I said, on the right side of things, a conflict, there's always something. All parties are always accountable. But do treat, like, when you have, again, that impasse, look at it and think of it almost like, like, again, a board game. Like, you're all working on this thing, like a cooperative board. You're all working on this thing together, and bringing people to think about at this object in the center that everyone's working on, as opposed to you and I, or us and them, or this group versus me. That's never going to land well, and it's just going to protract disconnect and
Yeah.
disagreement.
So go into, like, if you, for example, if you have to speak to somebody about, something that had gone wrong because of sort of task that they had done or something like that, you would go into it like a problem that we both need to solve, as opposed to the mindset of like, right, I'm gonna rinse you now. Like, we're gonna have an argument now, because I'm really that I know it seems extreme, but it's like the
Right.
kind of, it's that oppositional mindset, isn't it, versus the cooperative.
It never works. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that never works. But what I'm very supportive of, though, is really good boundaries, and not tolerating disrespect. And thankfully that's happened very few times in my career. But really, what we're not talking about here is like blatant disrespect, or encroachment, rudeness, or somebody just when that occurs, absolutely, in a very calm way, address that, and address that swiftly. I always tell people about the discomfort. It's hard. It's very hard. Sometimes it's culturally hard for people as well. They've, grown up, personally and professionally, in environments that is very like conflict reduction or avoidant. But I always tell people the discomfort that you feel is over time, by not addressing something, is much stronger than the acute discomfort you're going to feel just in addressing it. Just address it. You could do it poorly, but at least you address it. So, this segment of our conversation is definitely not about that encroachment or that trespassing into, from, a rudeness or mistreatment perspective. But it's really about that mutual conversation about, hey, this went off course. Can we talk about it? And just letting the other person say, wow, you know what, you're right. Or I don't see that off course. Okay, let me share why, what I'm seeing, what the impact is. You'll always want to focus, Anthony, on impact. Take the personal out of it. We all have a lot of, strong feelings, perceptions, things that we believe, truly believe. But you want to take that, hold on to that, and that those are valid. But really, again, look at it with, what happened and what was the impact. That's the crux of the right conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. So I might be asking you like something that requires a whole 2-hour talk here. But we talk about, I guess, architecture creating a culture where everyone kind of has this mindset of practical empathy, of talking to each other, being aware of what other people's problems are. It's incredibly tough. I mean, and I guess, a lot of how it works is probably quite mysterious and something you can't put your finger on. But are there just some very simple practical things from someone in your role, if you're in HR leadership, people leadership, that you can start thinking about implementing to make that easier? Say you've got a problem. Let's say, like, okay, we've got some toxicity problems here. We know there's a lot of complaints coming my way about people's behavior, about the way people are talking to each other and things like that. What kind of thing are you just looking at, just from a sort of simple kind of, just simple, like, policy standpoint of like, this is what we do, to ensure that these things, that this way of acting continues all the time, or doesn't continue?
Yeah. I would say a few things. I'm talking generally speaking, not particularly about my company, but just generally speaking, is, number one, culture is something that is in the everyday moments. Culture is not this cataclysmic, here we are. It's not like this island in the future that we get to, and then we're like, we made it. We're here. Culture is everyday moments. It's how we how we greet people, how we're present, how we're proximate to people, you know, having the nuance of, when is it right to, be in person to have a dialogue, whenever possible versus sometimes virtually. Having fun with somebody, that's a huge part of culture as well. Getting to know people in ways that make sense for them, especially personally, understanding, people's roles, all of that are all foundational to a great culture. When culture goes awry, I guarantee you there's tons of signals in advance, tons of small misses that build up. And usually it goes back to, those three things that I've talked about in other forums, which is, are the roles clear? Like we talked about a few moments ago, you know, and if they've gone awry, where has conflict or disagreement come up? Is the structure right? Like are, two or several functions duplicating work? And is that creating frustration? And have we hired the right people? Have we hired the wrong people? Have we hired people that are really willing to adapt and have a healthy mindset? Or are they just really out for themselves? And if people are less professionally mature, can they be coached? I've seen so many success cases of, again, that, kind of drawing a boundary, giving good coaching, and people can turn around, you know? The other construct, which can really create some misses with culture, have to do with time pressure and people having time pressure to get their work done. And that creates obviously an atmosphere sometimes of excitement, sometimes of tension, sometimes of sentiments of opposition. If people are in your way to get really important work done, or you perceive that's not going to be helpful. So I think we also in thinking about, I encourage people to think about a healthy culture is what do all those elements, contribute? Everyone should be under time pressure to do really good work, but is it like kind of, unhealthy stressors that then, create dynamics? And I always encourage as well when something goes awry to keep asking why, to keep saying, okay, this occurred not right. This is something that's off in the culture, in this team, in this group, in this organization. Then you ask why, and then you get your answer. And then I guarantee you there's two more whys behind it. There's the root is behind several doors. It's not just the first thing that comes up. And having that discipline to understand it, understanding history in an organization and where things came, what things were in the beginning, but not wallowing in that, just acknowledging, well, we're at this point, this happened. Good, we've recognized it. Now we're going to make sure that these things that weren't helpful or at the time, weren't optimal, that we don't repeat them. That those are all things, thoughts I wanted to share on that. But, I think it's really important for every organization to really impress upon each employee, regardless of their role, that culture is their responsibility and to understand what we mean by culture.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's. Do you think that the like? Do you think these kind of you mentioned kind of like fun moments and things like that? Do you think it is the? Do you think it's the company's responsibility to create moments like that? Do they need to sort of create moments where people kind of bond a little bit, or is it all professional? It's maybe a complicated question, but I guess what I'm asking is, to what extent is it the company's responsibility to kind of ensure that people kind of bond outside of just a professional capacity, or is there no responsibility there? What do you think?
Yeah. I would say it's a shared responsibility. And it could be something small. So, I absolutely would, promote or argue with anybody on the fact that if you feel joyous about the job you're doing, if you feel connected with your colleagues, and if you can have like ways, of spontaneously interacting, you are certainly going to do more valuable and deeper work. And it doesn't mean intrusive. Some people are private people at work. So it's not about like kind of everyone bearing their souls. but it's about, just that connection of things being easy. I think people thinking about how can I be easy to work with, and kind of setting the stage for, and others as well. It's the small moments. Like, culture does not have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be overwrought. It could mean gatherings, it could mean celebrations and acknowledgments, but it doesn't have to be a lot of money. It doesn't have to, but it does have to be expectations of how you interact with your colleagues. And when you interact poorly, there's consequences. When you interact well, you get acknowledged. And that's really important, and that the top leadership in any company feels that that's important, and the employees see and experience that as well. So yeah, it's about really making sure that those everyday connections can come up.
I think there's definitely what you mentioned there about the company recognizing people when they've done things. I've definitely noticed that as being kind of a contagious element. Like when higher management starts to like recognize people and say like this person did something really great. I've noticed that then other people, peers start to do it as well.
Yeah,
Like it becomes like a kind of, oh, this is the thing that we do here. This is a place where like we talk about the great things that each other have done all the time. And I think that's such a small thing, but if you can normalize that,
yeah,
that makes a huge difference.
yeah,
Huge
yeah.
difference, I think, in bonding people. And also, like going back to what we were saying before, helping people to understand what other people's roles are.
That's right.
When you say, look, you might not know this guy who works in finance, but this is what he's done this week. You might not know what he does, and this is why it's impactful. And when you
Yeah.
when you highlight that, that encourages that kind of curiosity,
It
doesn't
it
it? That
costs it costs nothing. It costs nothing, and it takes even sometimes minimal time. And I'd say throughout our conversation, I've mentioned some very fundamental things, a few minutes ago. I've mentioned something that's fun and light, otherwise, some hopefully things that are more substantial. But that's what I would encourage anyone to think about as they're building an organization, building a culture, taking a look, is think about the dimensionality of it, that it's not just one thing, it's just tending. It's this continuous tending to many things at once. It's absolutely doable. It's necessary, for a great culture, a thriving organization. It's just that tending to those dimensions of the small, the big, the empathy of what somebody else's experience might be. And is the zeal to resolve things before they get into big things. All of that is really important.
Yeah, definitely. Totally, like I think you nailed it earlier where you said it's not an island. It's we're already here and we have to cultivate
Yes.
it. This is the space that we
Perfect.
have. No, this is horror. We have to. That's kind of hard to think of it, I guess. Rather than yeah, definitely. Well, we're coming to the end of our time, Connie. I'm sorry to say because I'm having a great time chatting to you. But I was wondering if we could finish on this. Is just a thing that we do with all guests is to talk about, maybe you could just talk about three things about the kind of people function or HR leadership, the misconceptions that are common that you would like to send to Room 101.
Yeah, sure. A lot of times you hear HR and it's scary. It's scary. People think HR, corrective action, termination, rules and regulations. Well, those things are important. I'll first acknowledge that. Without rules, regulations, policies, all of that, then you can't have a good culture, you can't have a good operating company because people have to have an understanding of what they can and can't do. And for that safety, for the functioning, for abidance by law, which is really important. So yes, those things are important. When things go off course, making sure that they're corrected are very important. But that is not the whole of it. And I think because those things that I just mentioned, those three things are so consequential that it becomes very outsized into all that human resources is about. And I particularly, not for just nomenclature or because I wanted to be jazzy and hip, but I intentionally have I function as the people function because it is people first and all of the complexity and again, to use that word dimensionality that comes with it, that it's about, just people first is, the great employee experience, the training opportunities, the coaching, the onboarding, all of that also. But I think that that's something for human resources that's been a bit chronic throughout times, is kind of getting ahead of that. I think the other thing is that it's a call when you absolutely need, and that's something I can say I don't experience, thankfully, in my role, but it's something that can be fall under, it can be a little bit of a trap in the body of work of human resources is, "Oh, I've got a problem." Well, sure, that's great to be trusted when there's a problem, but how about when there's not? And I think that's a good measurement of thinking about how are you making sure that your offerings, your skills, what you can contribute are known so that it's not the last call, the last exit, but it's the engagement along the way as well. So, those are a couple that come to mind. Yeah.
It's definitely, I love how you said that. I mean, I've heard people joke in my past jobs that I've had where people have said, oh, like someone says something rude to somebody else in a jokey kind of way, and they'll go,
Mm.
oh, calling HR, calling HR. It's just is a joke, but that's kind of speaking to what you're talking about there, where it's like it's in people's minds that that you call HR when something goes really bad. Like when there's a somebody said something abusive or something's gone wrong. That's how I've understood it in the past. And I guess it goes back to what you were saying before, that no, like we are cultivators. We're
Yes.
always at work at what we're doing. We're not here putting out fires.
Right.
You know, we're
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes we do. You know, yeah. I mean, if there's such a poor interaction that somebody is, or something goes wrong, I absolutely want to hear about it. I absolutely want my team wants to be engaged 100%, but it's not the whole of who we are. Yeah, for sure.
and I definitely think now I think work culture is really under the microscope more than ever before, I think. And I think social media is a big part of that, actually. I think now I feel like the people function is more important than ever, actually. And I think people are thinking about it more than they have been before. Hence People Alliance. That's why we're here. Which I think it's a great thing, And I think that people are talking about it like in that way, And people are understanding culture as a thing that is as necessary as anything else in an organization, definitely.
Great.
Yeah. So thanks so much for your time today, Connie. People want to reach out to you, talk more about the subject, where should they go?
I get, always LinkedIn for sure. Send me a message on LinkedIn. Happy to chat. And, and of course I'm going to be on the circuit. I think I have some engagements in 2026 I'm looking forward to. And, hopefully we'll see their different conferences and talks I'm going to give. So I've always enjoyed time with you, Anthony, and thanks for having me as your guest and being interested in what I have to share.
It's been very fascinating, honestly, really interesting. I'm sure people are going to enjoy this. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Anthony. Take care.